Greetings, everyone, from the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. If you're ever, it's like east of Flagstaff. I'm coming from Santa Fe, making my way to Phoenix, so I'm gonna hang out for a few weeks or a month or so doing some interviews and visiting friends. And I'm a weather chaser. So I like being warm in the winter and have a ton of awesome interviews lined up. Speaking of awesome interviews, this one is one of them. It's not unusual for me to interview new people I haven't met before and have it be like a couple minutes before the conversation really takes off. This is just a fantastic episode. Especially after we get going about 3 or 4 minutes into it. And we're talking about toad IVF. I learned a bunch about amphibians, some evolution, some impacts on humans, and kind of amphibians being the canary in the coal mine in terms of fresh water. Really interesting and important stuff. Thank you so much to the Fort Worth Zoo for having me. It was so nice. I did like 4 episodes there with the old Here We Are podcast, which you can go back and find, I believe, December 2019. I released those. If you want to hear more episodes like this wonderful one, and I have more information about the show at the end of this episode. I hope you guys are awesome. Oh, and I was just in Santa Fe. If you're ever in Santa Fe, look up mini donkeys. There's a mini donkey ranch that I visited. I took some pictures. I'll probably post them on my social media and stuff, which I should get better about. And highly, highly recommend it. Well, I'm getting ready to gear up for bringing back the forgotten holiday that celebrates the donkeys of the Bible, the Feast of the Ass. Yes, that's a real thing that happened during the medieval times, and I'm starting up again next January 14th, which is part of the reason why I'm spending some time in Arizona, because we're going to be making a pilgrimage to probably Phoenix, maybe Tucson. So stay tuned for that and more madness and fun and science and whimsy. You guys are awesome. Can you guys introduce yourselves? I'm the worst at intros, and I will inevitably screw up everything.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I'm Diane Barber, and I'm the senior curator of Ectotherms.
all right.
I'm Allison Julien. I'm a reproductive biologist, specifically for ectotherms.
All right. Well, I know there's always the weirdest thing to say out loud. I know a thing or two about reproduction. I actually, you know, if you interview enough scientists and learn enough about biology and Darwinian concepts, of course, evolution is going to be a large part of that. I know nothing at all about amphibians, but I'm fascinated. So before this episode, I didn't even know that all toads were frogs, but not all frogs were toads. So that's what we're working with. Yeah. That's where we're starting. Could you give me just like a little 101 amphibian?
Sure. Well, like you said, there's over 6,000 species of amphibians in general, and the toads and the frogs kind of overlap sometimes in their descriptions. For example, the Panamanian golden frog is not a frog; it's actually a toad. Comes from the toad family. So, but in general terms, amphibians, like frogs, typically stay closer to bodies of water. They depend upon the water more, stay around water more. And then toads are typically use the ponds to breed in, and then they leave.
Okay.
And they find refugia in other places under rocks, and only come out usually just during the spring or when it's their breeding season. If there's heavy rains in dry areas and things like that.
And so toads are drier and have like the warts and things generally.
Usually more of the bumpy skin, yes, and they can they tend to be able to, yes, be in more dry environments than your typical frog.
And I guess warts is misleading. That's just the texture of their skin. And there's the old
Right.
wives' tale or whatever myth of getting warts from the frogs.
Yeah.
Which I turns out I believed until I was roughly last week. 44 years old.
No, you can't get warts from frogs or toads, but we still kind of refer to their bumps as warts. I mean, it's kind of a term that even scientists use, but it's really not. Yeah.
All right. So just to kind of give an overview of why you two are on the same episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about essentially some of the breeding programs here at the zoo. Correct?
Yeah. Yep. So we have several. For amphibians specifically, some of our biggest species are, as Diane mentioned, the Panamanian golden frog, and then the Puerto Rican crested toad, and the Houston toad as well are some of our biggest amphibian programs.
Yeah, Chiricahua leopard frog.
Chiricahua leopard frog.
Yeah, hellbenders we've worked with in the past.
What's a toad or frog breeding program look like at a zoo? Why does it exist? What's involved in it?
Lots of amphibians are declining because of the change in climate. And some of those species just, again, they're really tied into those moist environments. And if the temperatures start to increase and they cannot climb to higher elevations where it's cooler, then they start to disappear. And then also disease is a big issue. There's an amphibian chytrid fungus that affects a lot of species. And then they're just not able to cope with that. And it's been spreading all over the globe. And so we work with some particular species. A lot of them are federally listed as threatened or endangered, like the Houston toad and the Puerto Rican crested toad. And part of their recovery, the biggest part of recovery is reintroduction component. Hence, we have to have larger populations in captivity that we can breed lots and lots of offspring to expedite the recovery for those particular species. And the way we've become involved has kind of metamorphosed through time because it's, the crested toad program, for example, started 40 years ago. And I became involved in 1998. And so we're still, we learn a lot going through the different programs. Not every species is the same, especially how they reproduce. So we're always trying to learn something. We have to learn something new, and sometimes it takes years to do that. What we change this year and try this year, we learn from, and then we have to wait till the next breeding season the next year and try to apply something to kind of adapt. And so it just takes a while, and it's always changing, and it's an evolutionary process for us for a lot of these programs.
So one thing I was really surprised by that's related to both of you, as I was doing a little research, I was surprised how much paternal care there was in some odd frogs and toads. I was a little bit surprised.
Yeah, not a lot of the species have that, but there are, like the dart frogs. Some of the dart frogs feed their young eggs, the tadpoles' eggs that they produce, unfertilized eggs. And then there's species in Africa that actually take care of their tadpoles and kind of herd them to ponds, to areas of the pond that are beneficial for those tadpoles, whether it be temperature, food source, or the body of water is drying up in one area, they'll dam it so the tadpoles can metamorphose. Yeah.
But I saw there was some fathers involved, and so which is like
again
that's
with
a
the
very
dart
rare.
frogs,
Carry the tadpoles.
They'll carry the tadpoles on the back. Yeah.
You just don't. I was not. There's very few dads involved out there in the wild kingdom. So I was a little surprised. How in the world does a frog evolve? I mean, evolution's so weird, and I get just like the span of time, the interesting complexity, and do you like saying niche or niche? I like the like.
I say niche.
I say
You
niche.
you say niche, yeah. Most scientists,
Yeah.
I'm like the folksier like niche, but it's that that a dad no less would that usually splits shortly after it reproduces it. That a dad would evolve to grab a tadpole, put it on its back, go up a insane climb up a tree, and then I was just watching this. I forget what. I'm sure you know the species that I'm talking about. It probably gets a lot more attention on the animal documentaries and stuff than some of the other frogs and toads up there.
Yeah.
It goes all the way up some tree and then drops its offspring off in some little pond and some plant that isn't attached.
Yeah, and I think that's why there's so many species of amphibians, is because they've been good at evolving to the particular area that they're in. And they adapted, they can adapt very quickly to the environments that they're in because they usually produce a large number of offspring. And so there's survivability. When you're talking about something like a tortoise that only has a few eggs once every couple years, and maybe one of those will survive, you know, the evolutionary process is much slower, and it's harder for bigger vertebrates to adapt to the environment as opposed to amphibians.
Amphibians buying more tickets in the lottery,
correct,
essentially.
yes. Yeah.
Well, and something that Diane touched on is that investment, right? So the majority of your amphibian species, your anurans, your frogs and your toads, you're going to have them as explosive breeders. They're all going to breed at once.
Who came up with that term, by the way, and why did you all just be like, yes, that's what we're gonna. That's what we're gonna use. We're gonna say explosive breeding. What's explosive breeding, and what is particular? First off, I didn't think that there was non-explosive breeding until I read the term. But what's that term?
Well, essentially, it just means that, for example, when the weather conditions are appropriate, so a big rainstorm or something like that in a seasonal animal, all of them come to breed at the same time. So it's this big orgy, for lack of a better word, and with a lot of breeding events, a lot of eggs, a lot of offspring produced. So you just end up with millions of breeders and their offspring in one night, essentially. So it's an explosion of reproduction.
Okay.
And there's some species like marine toads that can lay over 30,000 eggs, one female. And so, you know, that's a lot. If you think about numbers, how many, like in Australia, that's why they're doing so well.
And that sort of goes back to your paternal care aspect. So the maternal side is obviously investing a lot of resources in just making the eggs and the huge number of eggs that they lay. So then you get a little bit of give back. I think it's appropriate, at least, for the boys to come in there and take care of their offspring as well.
Interesting.
In some cases.
And that's why there's not as much maternal or paternal care provided from an amphibian's perspective, because they don't need to use the resources for that, right? Because they're producing so many kids that...
I don't need 30,000 Timmies out there. We just need, like, you know...
We just need, exactly.
Right. So thus, so at any of the programs that you have involved, this is a matter of probably producing like millions of tadpoles and putting. I see. Well, okay. Before I dig further into that, in speaking to the variety of species. Amphibians they've been around for longer than most. Were they basically some of the first species on land?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
It would have been, and then
developed from basically fish ancestors, grew legs, and walked away from the pond, or they developed adaptations to breathe there. Right.
Because and then eventually some things evolved to lay eggs on land that would have the water in it and everything. It's interesting that's it's fascinating to me that I mean the evolution doesn't really have like the kind of direction that we would intuitively think of it having in our in our minds, where it's just like you make it to land, and then next step, top of the mountain, and then there we are.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to me that something, some things have made their way to land, and then did hippos start going back in, or were their ancestors ever fully like out? Or but I'm thinking like dolphins or whales that like made their way back, where amphibians have a lot of them are just like, no, we're good. We like it right here in this kind of in between.
Well, as you said, evolution's not goal driven, right? It's based off of survival. So if you have an animal that can produce thousands and thousands of eggs, and that keeps them doing just fine, and they can sit nice in their ecological niche, then they're just going to keep propagating, and they're going to survive that way. And this also goes back to Diane's comment about the threats to amphibians, the disease, and then the climate change issue, is that now you've got these animals that have been for millions of years able to exploit these niches with their explosive breeding and other reproductive strategies. Now you've got them pushed out of that, but it's happening so rapidly that it's causing the declines.
This is a theme that we're going to be hearing about over and over again on the show, I'm afraid. So this is maybe a good example of how particular and unique our modern times are. Going back to you mentioned this disease that's now global. Maybe could you expand on how some amphibian disease has gone worldwide? That doesn't seem like something that would have happened.
Well, part of it is that it existed for a long period of time before we discovered what it was.
Okay.
So back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, there was a declining amphibian task force actually formed, because we started realizing that a lot of our amphibians in the U.S. particularly were disappearing. And it's like, so what's the cause of that? So they started looking into all the root causes of why some of these amphibians were disappearing. And one of the bigger, kind of more common themes was what was described as red leg disease. And so basically the amphibian would start to, the body around the drink patch area, the lower extremities would become red. Basically, blood vessels were bursting, and so it looks really red. And then they kind of have this like paralysis, and then they die. So they become septic and die. Well, they were like, what's causing that? Is it aerial applications of insecticides, which was a cause for like Wyoming toads? They were spraying a lot of mosquitoes at the time out in Laramie. It's beautiful, pristine habitat, and it's like, what's going on here? Well, the only thing they were doing was spraying for mosquitoes. So they were like, oh, it must be that. And then there's in other areas, you start to see these same declines. And looking back, it's kind of like an aha moment, and it's like, oh, it was BD. It was the amphibian chytrid fungus, which they later proved scientifically through museum specimens and things like that. But it was, what's happening is when these animals are suppressed or immunocompromised from things that are happening, stressors that are happening from outside their environment, like, just like us as human beings, if we are stressed, you're not very healthy, right? I mean, because you just start to, and so
when you're because this is still like less than 10 episodes of this show or so. I've done like 400 some episodes of my past one, and I'm kind of part of the reason why I rebranded was to start the building blocks over and over again. So kind of some building blocks of stress is to overly simplify. There's some energy delegation kind of going on, and so an acute stressor is great for an amphibian to jump away from danger or something like that. And then when there's, say, some environmental stressors that has this chronically, say, doing something used for delegating energy away from an immune system and digestion and some more long-term priorities to these short-term things, and then that's happening on a chronic level where this downregulation, this parasympathetic response isn't kind of bringing the regular digestion and immune function back online. this is creating then a chronic vulnerability, and then that makes it easy for some new sort of pathogen to.
That may have already been in the environment, and we're learning that with a lot of different species of animals now. Some of these pathogens have always been in the environment, but the animals could survive with it because they were healthy. But then you get those stressors, and it's chronic, and their bodies just can't fend off all of these things that are attacking them.
But in terms
of,
but globally, what happened there? Was there some trade, some animal trade stuff going on?
With amphibians too, I just want to say is, they have very permeable skin, right? Anything that gets on a frog
so crazy.
Gets absorbed. And so even soap, dishwashing soap, can be toxic and kill a frog. So anything we're putting in the environment in our water, they're the first indicators that there's something off here. And so when you start to see that, it's like, wake up call. There's things in our water that we're not detecting that's not healthy for the environment as a whole ecosystem. So yes, going through time.
This is in the way that have you seen the where is it, in Japan or something, where they use I hope this isn't like I don't think it's a made up thing that I fell for. I think they're actually doing this. They're using some oysters or mussels or something like that. That they have like they basically have like glued a little spring on them or something, so that when because they'll close up when the water gets too polluted, and then they have like a sensor that will then, like the canary and the coalmine kind of situation that we figured out
how to. But I wouldn't be surprised.
How to utilize that, and so amphibians are in potentially, because they can breathe through their skin and everything. Potentially, this is a canary and the coalmine situation for it.
Yeah. So as scientists are seeing all these big declines, and they started to go to Central America and look at all these different populations, just saying, what is the health of our populations in Central and South America? Biologists were starting to go out into the field and look for these animals, and lo and behold, they were disappearing. And then they started to be able to map the trail of disappearance, basically. And that's when they're like, ooh, this is a disease. This is something we need to be really serious about. Then they identified what it was. And then there was funding that was contributed to finding out about this major pathogen that's killing amphibians. And then, through that funding, then other countries start to look at this issue and it's, we're having the same problem. And yes, so then that's when it was like, it is global. Yep. And a lot of animals are coming in through the pet trade. The pet trade's not necessarily a bad thing, but if the animals are coming in diseased and there's no screening processes for that coming into the country, then that's a problem. And more recently, they just found, they've identified now a chytrid that's basically focused for salamander species. And North America has the largest number of salamander species in the world, in consolidated, mostly the northeastern part of the United States. Of course, we have some everywhere else, but here in Texas, we have a lot of spring salamanders that are all critically endangered because they're in the water. But where am I going with this?
Well, the pet trade.
The pet trade. So with B-sal, which is the short name for the salamander fungus, they've actually have passed legislation to stop bringing any salamander species into the United States because they haven't found it here in the United States yet. So basically safeguarding our native species of salamanders. We could never have done that with our native and other amphibian species because the cat was already out of the bag. It was already here.
I see.
And it was documented way before the 1960s. And I think they've even found it earlier since then. But
it's hard to communicate some of these things to the public, and then when people, pet traders have some skin in the game, and have you ever heard of parrot fever by chance?
No.
It's an amazing story. It's during the when it was in the beginning of commercial aviation. Where it was attainable for people, generally wealthier people, to start flying to South America, and then they would start, bringing back their talking piece and showing off to their friends these tropical birds, and then soon this became this trendy thing to advertise your status, everything else, and who doesn't like a tropical bird?
Right.
And so then now you no longer need to pay this expensive plane ticket and get all dressed up. Remember when people used to get dressed up on the planes? I
remember when people used to get dressed up to go to the store. Now they go in pajamas. So yeah.
I'm guilty. I'm a pajama wearer. But then they so then it's a lot of these concepts end up being so related. And so they start once they started eventually boxing up parrots. Then they had kind of an underlying thing that was like essentially like a cold for them that that in the confines and the stressors and everything else, it became exacerbated, and then it became zoonotic under dried feces when people were cleaning the cages. So then they started
airborne.
And so it was I believe it was the advent of CDC. Actually, they started in biohazard suits and stuff way back when. And because like people would even outside the lab would accidentally inhale some of the powder. It was incredibly deadly. And so then they started trying to figure out, hey, maybe we could give you like if you let us test your parrots or whatever, we'll like give you a stamp of approval, then you can advertise that. And then that got into all this like conspiracy theory stuff. They're trying to control this or that. And then it was we're almost done. It was some sort of politician done with this spiel and just getting started with you, by the way. But it was like some senator or something like that whose wife had a bunch of parrots, and he even rose to power peddling like conspiracies that were like scientists are trying to stop us from having the birds that we want, trying to control our rights and all this. And then his wife ended up getting it, almost dying. A scientist who had luckily survived, had his own antigens, gave him to her, saved her life. And this was this weird, like quaint time back like 100 years ago when people would like change their minds about things. They'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I was wrong, and I have changed my mind." It was just crazy.
Said something. It
was weird. It was so cute back then, the way that would happen. And then they
word of mouth, right?
and then they made some measures in that way, and so it's a story that stuck with me because it seems like it's applicable to a lot of modern pet trade.
Disease is a big issue, and that's one of the problems, with BD. That was one of the problems for the amphibian chytrid fungus, is that it can be spread on your shoes. Yep. So anybody that's taking a walk in the woods and then goes to another site in your backyard, you could be bringing that chytrid to your backyard without even knowing it. And so, the same thing happens with a lot of species that live in the water, with fishermen that wear waders, and anything could be on their waders. Yeah. Same thing, cleaning the hull of your boats, is really important. Dumping all that water out of your boats before going into another lake, because you are just basically taking one disease or pathogen from one, or invasive species from one water body to another. So it's just, there's a lot. And if you really sit and think about it, it gets so depressing. And it's like, oh my gosh, how can we do anything?
Well, listen, it's like you go out fishing, you have a few beers, you go back, I'll skip today. And it's very understandable. Even the bait fish that people are using, some of them are diseased. That was another way that BD has been spread through crayfish, through mud puppies that have been used for bait fishing. And it's so, it's all about educating people. Everybody just needs to try to do the best that they can to think about those sorts of things. So it's good to talk about it, to know about both the risk factor and just to try to be as safe as possible. But well, there's some proximity issues too, which is, it's a little easier for, to like maybe make a case to a fisherman that like, hey, wash your boots off, and otherwise you might not have such good fishing next year.
Right.
Whereas, hey, put in a very expensive fertilizer like reuptake something so that it doesn't go into the river, so that it
Right.
doesn't go down to the
Right.
Gulf and impact the fishermen down there. Is like that's a little
Right.
bit harder to kind of
Yeah,
get through to.
well, it's easier to get through the people that are commonly doing those things, correct? Right? I mean, the common use people, but it's harder for the tourists, for the people that are going from place to place to place to place without even having a knowledge of it at all.
Right.
Like people
you
going to
come
national
here-
parks. Think of all the people that go to the national parks and from all over the world. Someone get off the plane, they go right to the park. And so what's on their shoe? It's just it can be.
You come to the Fort Worth Zoo, you go like, you know what? I don't want to pay $6 for the lettuce. I'll sneak my own.
That's a problem.
That must be. I saw that sign.
Yeah.
So that's clearly a thing that's happened where people
I
are
think
like,
so, yes.
bring the backpack
Yeah.
of their own. I'm getting nods from. Oh my goodness. Well, people don't know.
They don't know.
You sneak M&Ms into the movie theater. You don't think about it collapsing the entertainment industry and Well, so what efforts are being done to reintroduce to throw a few more lottery tickets in some into the amphibians, some whatever metaphor that I'm trying to create right now.
Yeah. So in general, amphibians can be very difficult to breed in captivity. So that's one of the issues that kind of stands in the way with a lot of these reintroduction programs. And like Diane was saying earlier, that every year we're learning more with every new thing we try. So amphibians, to stimulate breeding, they like the rainfall, they need the water, they need this drop in barometric pressure, so change in the atmospheric pressure, things like that. Those are very difficult to replicate in captivity. So one of the things that I do is I help with assisted reproductive technologies. So it's this suite of basically techniques to utilize in our populations, and they can be as minimally invasive as simply using ultrasound to track egg development in females and knowing when to pair them. And then it gets progressively more hands-on from there. So things like reproductive hormone injections. So we do utilize those, especially in our Houston Toad program. And even as complex as in vitro fertilization. So collecting eggs from the females, sperm from the males, and then fertilizing in a petri dish. So.
And then the biobanking.
And the biobanking as well.
How are you collecting those?
Sperm?
Yeah,
that's what everybody wants to know. So it's not as sexy as it sounds.
It didn't sound sexy, actually.
Well, the majority of anurans, they have a cloaca, and so it's just one hole for everything.
Yeah,
and so
that's the way to go.
It's efficiency, and all about efficiency. That evolutionary benefit there. But they release sperm in their urine. So essentially, if we were to give them a hormone treatment, for example, they would just urinate the sperm out. So you just hold them, and then they will pee.
Catch it.
Okay.
Catch it, basically. Yeah, in a petri dish. So for toads, in particular, they are excellent peers because they're scare peers. It's like you intimidate them or you frighten them, and then they pee as a defense mechanism. So
like put me down. When you're a kid, you never picked up a toad and had it pee on you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
I'm
used to
starting
just
to
bark
have
at them.
some memories come back. I believe that I did have that happen. Actually,
so for a long time,
wait, what are we talking about? A defense mechanism? Do you mean like it's lightening their load quick, or it's deterring, or maybe a little bit of both?
It's probably a little bit of a natural reaction, but also just
like some predator is getting peed on, being like, "Oh, okay, I give up."
It's more like a lot of water. Yeah, it's more like water.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
A predator gets peed on. It's like, no thanks. I'm not hungry anymore.
I mean, I would feel that way.
Yeah,
but,
I suppose.
It's more. I think it's more startling. Especially if you get it in the face. It's like, it happens a lot with us, especially like if we're doing field work, and if I have a toad, I would hand it to her, or I'm like, come over here and see this. Look at this guy, and then just get shot. You get pee on in your face.
Got to turn my phone off.
That happens.
That's amazing that so toads have been around for what, like a 500 million years or something like that? Or
yes, well, since the dinosaur age,
and like all that time, I wonder how old some of the species are that exist today, but It's just speaking of like novel modern environments. Imagine being a toad or frog, and it's like, 500 million years, something grabs you. That is not good news.
Yeah, well, usually it's a
It
lot
generally
bigger
is
than
not
you
a
are, yeah.
happy ending.
Yeah.
I should
True.
say.
Yeah.
But that's so you get that. Have you seen the boy, I wonder if I should even talk about this. I guess I will. Can I edit it out? Have you seen there's people there different cultures will use like frog poison or whatever as like ritualistic
frogs and things like that.
Oh, you mean for
like
yeah.
Colorado River
Colorado
toad.
River toad. Yep.
It's a big
'Cause
one.
I think one's actually like kind of being like driven into
Yeah. Yeah, the river
because-
toad.
Yeah, it's the Colorado River
mhm,
toad.
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
So
it
that's
releases a poison from its
toxin.
gland, a toxin
Yeah.
from its glands. Yeah.
Now how do you get
How do you try that?
no, I know
Like,
how
do you-
to try
how
that.
do you get there?
No. Fortunately, they're making synthetic ones now, which at least for,
that's fine.
which for the frogs
Okay, yeah, that's good.
are better news. No, how do you get how do you evolve poison like bees? Like it's only females that have well, both sexes have the stinger, but only females have the actual like toxin because they're
the drones don't have stingers.
yeah,
No, the males don't have stingers.
oh, they don't even
just
have
the females do.
Some of them have pseudo stingers, I think.
We're talking about honey. If we're talking about honeybees,
Honeybees don't?
no,
Okay.
males don't have stingers.
Well, there I just learned something. I think some hornets or
The
something.
female, yes, there's lots of different families of bees and
She's also a
wasps.
bug
They're very
expert,
different.
So.
Well, I'm not an expert, but but yes. So with honeybees, yes, the females are the workers, and they all have stingers and they're barbed. And so when they sting you, it's a one-shot deal. But the female, the queen, she has like a retractable stinger, like more like a wasp would. So she could sting you multiple times. But then the drones, they do nothing.
And this is because the what was once used for eggs eventually like created enough space and got repurposed for some toxins over time, which is why females have it was like this odd
I don't know.
like,
Yeah,
adaptation.
the evolution.
The evolution of how they got the toxin.
The venom ducts type stuff.
Yeah. I'm curious, like how because I imagine it's costly. So how are these? First off, when you say like poisonous frog, like what's that mean? Just like if you try to bite them?
Poison is ingested. So if it's
so
absorbed
if you eat 'em-
or if you put it in your mouth, like through your
even
mouth.
absorbed?
Absorbed through your skin. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Well, and there are a couple different types.
Venom is injected. So a spider injects, wasps inject. So it's called venom, not poison.
Okay.
Venom if it bites you, poison if you bite it.
Wait.
Simplistically.
Wait, say that again.
So-
I didn't know that.
Venomous if it bites you, poisonous if you lick it. As if you bite it, simplistically.
That's okay. All
But with
right.
amphibians, you're talking about a couple different types. So with your dart frogs, for example, in captivity, they're not toxic because their toxin is derived from what they eat. So it's ants, right?
It's the
ants that they eat in the wild.
Yeah.
So on a diet in captivity, they're not going to have that.
Right.
Whereas toads, they have these glands, these protoglands, and they on the back of their heads, and they have their own. When they're threatened or when you pierce them, you can have that. It'll kind of exude, from that.
Oozes out of
And
there.
it does not taste good, and it really hurts your eyes.
It does. It burns your eyes. even some of the foam nest builders, frogs that build foam nests, and then the eggs are laid in that. If you get that in your eyes, it's very painful. So yeah.
How many times has that happened?
So,
well, if you don't wash your hands, right, and you kind of rub your face, that's what.
Yeah.
Or if an animal splashes in the water and
Okay.
it splashes you in the eyes.
How is it?
During my PhD, I did a lot of brain collections on some toads. And so when you're cutting through there, if you're not wearing eye protection, which I only did once, it can shoot into your eye.
Not here.
Not here. Sorry, not here.
at university.
Amazing.
But that's how I've experienced that. I don't know how Diane's experienced it.
Taking care of the animals.
How does it compare to any Any other
just
getting another thing
burns.
in your eye?
No, it just burns.
No,
It burns.
no,
But
no
again,
better
this
or
was
worse.
this was a small common toad. So you
regular
have
old eye
things like
burning.
marine toads, where that can be such a potent toxin for like pets, for example. So
Yeah,
they've had
it'll
lots
kill.
of fatalities of dogs if they bite into one of those and they can die just from having a little bit of an exposure.
Yeah.
So it does have a range.
Yeah, the North American toads don't do that. They
Yeah.
don't kill your pets, but the introduced marine toad will.
Yeah.
And they actually, marine toads do come up into Texas, South Texas. But
Yeah.
So could you could you now that could you tell me again the different species that you have the reproductive programs for now that we've set up some more
Yeah, and
building blocks?
So again, we have the Chiricahua leopard frog, Puerto Rican crested toad, and Houston toad, and Panamanian golden frog are kind of our big.
those are our big ones.
four.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the past, we've done a little bit with hellbenders.
Yep.
Are they all like native around this area?
No.
Well,
No.
Houston toad, not in this
They're
area.
in
but-
our region,
Oh, the region.
in the southwestern region
Yep.
and central region.
Why these species in particular? Are they like on? Why do they make the cut?
Okay, so the crested toads,
Yeah.
I was involved with that species before I came here. And then my predecessor that used to manage the program stepped down and he asked me to take it over. And so I took it over in 2005. So, and so I managed the program. We have 17 institutions that participate in breeding efforts for the Puerto Rican crested toad. And so my role is to kind of that of matchmaker. So everybody's in a stud book, just like we manage mammals, they're in a stud book. We know the genetic relatedness between individuals as well as individuals to the population as a whole. And so we take the stud book, I put it into a program that helps me look at appropriate genetic pairings. And then I look at the size of the animals, because obviously if the male's too big for the female, that's not going to work out, or vice versa. And then we have to look at the healthy animals, the age of the animals, and we know through like Allison's work how long they're reproductively receptive, or how long those females are going to be producing good eggs. So we look at all those things, put out the pairings to the different facilities. Usually about 4 facilities per breeding are slated to breed. And it's a 3-month process for us because they have to hibernate.
Wait, four facilities like
Other
around
zoos?
the
Throughout the country.
Yeah.
So I set up, we do 6 releases per year for Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And so for every release, I then tell each institution, so we have 4 institutions per release, usually 3 to 4 that are going to breed. And then I send out the pairings. And then it's 2.5 months before we breed. They know they have to like look at the animals on their side, do all the health checks on their side. If there's an issue with one animal, then we find a substitute to breed. And then they cool them down for 22 days. And then we bring them up at the same time because it's all on the same schedule. And we let them try to reproduce naturally. We rain on them, let them produce naturally for 3 days. If that doesn't happen by the 4th day, then we use hormones to elicit the breeding response that we need. And then they lay eggs, and then they're out the door 7 days later. And then we put them all on the same flight. We use FedEx for crested toads. Put them all on the same flight. They go down to Puerto Rico, and then our partners will acclimate them at the pond sites for that particular release. And then we repeat the process.
Acclimate them at the pond sites? What's
Yeah,
that?
so we ship the tadpoles. We ship tadpoles for that species. And we ship them just like people ship fish. So you put them in bags with their water, half filled with water, half filled with oxygen. And then you have to be certified to do that through FedEx. You can't just put fish in the mail, by the way. And so, yeah, they're in styrofoam.
What do they do if you? Will they send it back to you? And then
Well, you would risk it breaking, I think, damaging other boxes and things.
But
if they're not
they
put
find the fish, and then they
you have
what
to
do
put them
they?
in appropriate size boxes and things with the 2.5-inch thick wall, so that they're not going to get
Okay.
crushed and things like that.
But I'm just wondering what their procedure is if you don't have like the special thing.
I
They're,
don't really
they're
know.
Like, we find.
They probably find you. I don't know.
They find
if it's
you.
a big,
You get a
if there's a
knock on the
big
door.
problem, yeah.
I
would
kind
imagine.
of want to shiv a fish just to see if there's any blowback from it. That's the.
Yeah, I don't know.
I got like a little bit of a childish juvenile rebellion in me. That. So that's
So-
crazy. So you get a special. You talk to FedEx. You go like, let us explain what's going on here,
Well,
and then they're like, we see this a
several
lot
years of-
actually. And
Yeah,
then,
it took several years of coordination with FedEx to be able to get where we are today, just to make sure that we have, because it's difficult to, again, make sure everybody gets packed on the same pallet. It gets
Yeah.
put onto the plane so that it arrives there that day. And it's just so
Right.
and we need to make sure we're not shipping too late in the week so that they don't get stuck over weekend. And
Wow.
so, yeah, it takes a lot of coordination. So
Wow.
that's that. Crested toads are a little different. So Houston toads, there's basically
Can
facilities.
we stick with that just for one more
Yeah.
moment? So like then how many? So everything. This is an amazing year. Everything goes perfectly swimmingly. Do we say that?
Mhm.
And then okay, without a hitch, FedEx is really on it this year
Yeah.
and everything else. How many like tadpoles are you releasing?
Yeah, so
total?
for crested toads, we've released just over 830,000 tadpoles in a 35-year period of time.
Oh, 35. Okay.
Yeah. So every year, if we do 6 releases, and typically it just varies because of success, either between 3,000 and 10,000 tadpoles per release.
Okay.
Because most institutions don't have as many toads in one facility to breed more than 2 pairs at a time. Because again, it takes a lot of space, it takes a lot of personnel, time, and labor to take care of the toads. So they can only breed that many. Now we can breed 4 pairs at a time, but if you're looking at another species like Houston toad, we have 400 adults at one facility, at our facility. So we breed for a 14-week period of time, and we breed 12 to 14 pairs per week. And last year we put out just over 1,300,000 eggs, because we're doing eggs, not tadpoles.
Whoa.
So again, that makes a huge difference. And now we're working for the crested toads. I just got funding to do a building in Puerto Rico, so we're working towards that same model because we found out that it's so successful to be able to consolidate that many toads into one building and be able to just crank them out week after week after week after week.
Because this is in my mind. I guess how much space is it taking to have? So you're trying to set up this kind of honeymoon situation, and so you want them to be in a happy, stress-free environment. I imagine it's like even from just like a pure utility, you don't care as much. You're just trying to squeeze as many out as possible. It would still behoove you to have a stress-free environment, because that would lead to a lot more reproductive success.
Correct.
And so, so like what does like I'm a little surprised that it takes so much space just for up there.
Yeah, well, see, so the other kind of reason why we're limited on space is if they're animals that we're using for reintroduction, we also have to keep them isolated from the rest of our general population in the zoos.
Okay.
So most facilities for crested toads only have about an 8x10 or a 10x12 room. So that allows you to have maybe 2 racks with enclosures on those. And those are for housing. And then usually you have extra enclosures that you need to set up for the breeding itself, and then also for the rearing of tadpoles or eggs if you're holding back. So that's why it takes so much space. And then for us, yes, we have to make sure the animals are not overcrowded, because again, when we're dealing with large numbers, especially with the Houston toads, we have 2 buildings now, and there's about 200 toads in each of those buildings. And so we have to make sure that we're not putting basically more than, we usually use about 4 toads per enclosure, just to make sure they're not overcrowded, again, and they're not stressed. And if there happens to be some sort of disease issue that pops up, then we're not going to infect the entire collection. So, yeah.
And those aren't the breeding setups either. So for the Houston toads, they live with their little cohort in their enclosure. And then during breeding, we have a separate room that is specifically for breeding. And then later on, tadpole rearing for any that we're holding back or for head starting. So growing up a little bit before release. So that one's will have a little bit more of a simplistic setting, just so that we can sort of expedite the process of them breeding, laying, and then we can pull the adults back and put them back in their nice, happy home. So the Houston Toad program is unique in that we really have it down to an art, no pun intended, where we breed them on a Tuesday. So I go in, I inject females in the morning with hormones, males in the afternoon. They breed in the night. They've laid eggs by Wednesday. We count the eggs on Wednesday, and on Thursday, they ship out. So, and we have had 100% success this last year, hopefully this year, knock on wood, with doing it that way. And so those are really in and out of that room really quickly.
So it's a factory for toads.
Factory for toads, yeah. But the crested toads, on the other hand, as she said, for a couple of days, we do try to...
Yeah, it's not as intense, and it's...
encourage that natural breeding. So when the pairs go together, they do a bit more of a naturalistic setting. So
we have time to do more of a naturalistic setting.
So with head starting, I mean, I'm reminded. I don't think it's applicable to something like a tadpole necessarily, but
It is.
I'm reminded of what I'm about to say may not be applicable because tadpoles don't have the kind of same sensory stuff going on for predator avoidance as other young. But I remember I don't know if you ever heard of Barbara Natterson's book Wildhood. It's all about juvenile development in the wild, and there's some there's some, you know, they've set up experiments of like predator naive versus predator, and so you have like a condition where there's no predators or whatever for the young during the juvenile during this like critical learning period, and then you have a situation where they're just in with the predators like they would normally be, and then you have a situation where they can view the ones that are in with the predators and like mimic some of their and as you'd expect, the naive ones get plucked off pretty quickly because they don't learn to avoid the predators on up to the trade-offs of you lose a lot more when you put the predators in, but they gain a lot more skills or training. A lot. It's probably not so much applicable to tadpoles, but I'm wondering in terms of like head starting, like what's like the cutoff? Like how much can you do before you or choose it, like where you're setting them up for success and where you're setting them up for
It's very species specific. But for amphibians in general, most programs will reintroduce at the egg or the larval stage, because it's also important that those, once they have the opportunity to metamorphose at the pond, that they need to return to breed at. So they're imprinting on that site.
Oh, okay.
And if you release adults, they may not be, and again, it's species specific. And we don't know this for every species. But they may not be able to imprint. And then also, because again, we're dealing with such large numbers, the chances of you being able to rear up 3,000 tadpoles and give them a head start is impossible. And it's better for the tadpoles to be able, in my opinion, to be able to metamorphose in their environment, because those that are successful will be avoiding predators, right?
Well, and
they learn that, and they're probably pass that on to their offspring.
And there's also issues of building up their skin and gut microbiome. So you introduce them at a stage where they're just starting to eat. The only thing that's gone through that gut is things that are endemic to the environment that they're in. So they're already naturally building up whatever it is that they might need for that environment. But there are some areas that are doing, some programs that are trying to do things like predator avoidance in offspring that they release. So things like making sure that when a person walks up, they're not just like
feed me.
waiting for the food.
Come out and feed
Yeah,
me.
and they're actually hopping away like a
Yeah.
frog should,
Right,
so that
right.
because they kind of just see a shadow, and so in the wild that's a heron. In captivity, that's food. So
Yeah.
there are programs that do try to do that predator avoidance, but it is in a lot of ways better to just release them.
Yeah, if they found that for whatever species that adult survivorship is is best,
Yep.
then the trade-off for doing that, you will put the money and resources into rearing animals all the way to that life stage where it's not necessarily important to do for others.
Yeah.
And so, if there's more survivorship at the toadlet or egg or tadpole stage, then it's much better to release there because, again, it's that financial and
Right.
resource trade-off because there's no way we could release or raise that many.
Right. But then I've
Even
met,
raising 100 is a hardship for us.
Yeah.
of course. But then I met like Fiona the hippo in the Cincinnati Zoo, who was the first preemie hippo
Right.
that then it makes a lot
N
of
of
sense
one.
to
Yeah,
Oh,
N of
dump
one.
a lot
Yeah.
of dump a lot of energy into
Exactly, sure.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
circles back again to your paternal question earlier. So you've got an animal that only lays 3 eggs, a dart frog, then they're
Right,
going to
right.
put that investment into that N of 1.
And
Right.
and sometimes it also has to do about monitoring and what you're capable, how you're going to be able to find out what survivorship is for those animals in the wild. So we're limited we work with tiny things. So we're very limited. We can't put a gigantic radio transmitter collar like you could on a hippo
Right.
on a little toadlet that's no bigger than your thumbnail. And so then maybe it is important for us initially to raise some adults up where they can where we can get something on them that we can actually track them with.
Right. Right.
But just usually it's a subset, and then you still continue to do the other. You still continue to do the release. That's what we do with crested toads. We do the releases of tadpoles, but then when we want to find out specific information, like if it's a new reintroduction site, for example, we will rear up 20 or 40 toads so that we could put transmitters on them just to see where they go. What are they utilizing for refugia? Are they eating well? Are they adapting well?
What's refugia mean again?
Where the hiding places, like homes, like homes,
okay.
safe places. Right?
Oh, refuge.
Yeah.
That's a fun.
Yeah.
Okay, store that one away.
Yeah,
I love
there you
that.
go.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Nope.
That was all right. Well, what about the a zoo or like breeding facility, or I mean, people are probably have no doubt heard about like fish hatcheries, and these probably aren't completely foreign concepts to folks. Are there? Do you ever try to, or are there people simulating a wild environment to the extent that they can, and studying behavior that way to kind of make more predictions about where to release and do
so the Gopher Frog program, they use a lot of exclosures. They're basically tubs that they have outside that are screened off so predators can't get in. And they've been doing a lot of research looking at toad or tadpole avoidance, predator avoidance, also looking at the dynamics of just the water plants with the tadpoles, because they found that they do better with a certain species of plant. And is it the plant, or is the plant, are they feeding on the plant, or is the plant giving off some kind of inhibitor, with some of those tadpoles so that they're not growing as well in the presence of the absence of the plant, those sorts of things. So they're looking at that. And then also, it also just depends, like they have a longer tadpole stage. Like if you're dealing with a tropical species, the tadpole stage is very short because it's hotter, it's drier. They're going to metamorphose within 20 days. And some of our North American species that are in temperate areas, bullfrogs, for example, 2 years is in a tadpole stage. Okay. And so gopher frogs come from pretty cooler climates. They range up into the cool climates. And so it's different for them. They're doing a different type of thing. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about? Let me check the time really quick. Okay. Can you could you talk about the why why the effort? I mean, I'm sure there's a couple listeners that are like,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, the frog, goes extinct. What of it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as Diane said, they're an indicator species, so that's one of the primary things. You don't want your canary in your coal mine to go extinct, right? So
Okay, we didn't need canaries that anyway.
Yeah,
Anyway,
before
we'll
you
just keep
learn
on.
why, right?
Yeah.
Before you
Then
learn
we'll just
why.
go into the coal mine without having to
Yeah.
lug these canaries around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're an important aspect of food webs. So they are they're predator and prey species. So they fit into a certain ecological niche that's important for the broader environment as a whole. And there are also plenty of communities and plenty of areas where these animals are iconic, where they're very important culturally to the people that are there. Right now, I don't know if you've seen, we're seeing this huge explosion with Puerto Ricans latching on again to the Puerto Rican crested toad because you had Bad Bunny come out and feature it in his music videos, and so now you've got this new whereas it was often just the coquille in Puerto Rico, now you've got this resurgence of local pride in that species, and in Panama you've got the golden frog that is very important. So you have this cultural significance for both indigenous cultures and modern cultures.
It's like the Texas horned lizard here in Texas. People care about that.
Right.
Because they remember it as a child and it's iconic for the state of Texas.
Yeah.
But it's like not every animal has that. And so for me, the reason why I do this is because if we've caused the decline, if human beings have caused the decline for anything, then I think it's our responsibility to see if we can help that particular plant or animal coexist with us rather than just wiping everything out, right?
Okay, well, what about the other way? What about if okay, so now there's a listener, they're just convinced and they're sitting there, they're like, well, I actually have a bunch of these frogs. Mine are breeding like crazy.
They get confused.
And you know what, I'm just realizing all the good I could be doing in the world. They need all the help they can get breeding. These things are poisoning my eye half the time anyway. I'm just going to dump all these out into my yard and set them free. The more frogs, the better. Is there any drawbacks?
There is a problem with that. It's actually happening with alligator snapping turtles. They're federally listed now, and people, particularly in this region, Louisiana, used to farm them for food, right? Turtle soup, big thing in the South, and now there's some people that they're going to help the snake snapping or alligator snapping turtle. And so, they've taken upon themselves to start doing this. But what they're doing is, it might not be a good thing from a disease perspective. Also, when we do reintroductions, we look at the genetics from populations to make sure that we're doing it responsibly. And so we're not hybridizing with other animals per se in other different populations. And so there's a disease component risk, and there's also the genetic issue. And when some of these, people mean well, but sometimes they need to just kind of step back a little bit and really get informed about what it means to be responsible when you're doing reintroductions. Because we don't just go there willy-nilly. We really have to consider whether or not it's important to do. And then also what the effects of other species is going to be when we're doing these reintroductions. There could be something that we don't even know about that we're putting out there. So we have to really be, again, weighing the pros and cons. And is this a risk that we need to take right now? Or do we need to stop and just learn more information before we continue?
Well, and if what you're talking about is if someone just has a pet random species, then you're not going to throw that back out in the environment for a number of reasons. At the very least, you're just committing it to death because it's not adapted to survive in that environment. And at worst, you could cause a displacement or a disease outbreak or things like that. Or you can introduce a new predator, or you could have another marine toad situation where now you've got a toad that nothing eats it, nothing can really kill it, and it just eats everything and can breed so prolifically that nothing can keep up with it.
Yeah, look at the state of Florida. I mean, look at the the problems they're having with all these introduced pet species. I mean, it's a big problem.
It's like
Big
Jurassic
problem.
Park around there.
Yeah,
It is. And a lot of the islands are like that too. I mean, there's
Mhm.
so much stuff on islands. You're like, what is going on? You know, it's just like pot-bellied pigs running around. And it's just stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's nothing there to eat them or anything. So.
I mean, but if the idea of people sitting around talking about a pot-bellied pig problem is there's something funny.
And then people don't want to eat them because
Like,
they're so cute, but then they're
That's-
starting to tear up everything, and they're
Yeah.
there's no mammals there that control
oh
them.
yeah, horribly tragic, but on its face, like
Yeah,
it does.
exactly.
It seems like
A nice
you know,
it's just
of the
silly.
problems to talk about.
Yeah.
It's like it's at least it sounds cute.
Yeah.
Just
It
call it a
sounds-
hog, and then everybody will freak out. So
It,
it's fine.
it sounds like it's the cutest sounding way to destroy an ecosystem for sure.
It is. You know, we just need to pay attention to what we're doing. You know, even school teachers, again, well-meaning,
Yep.
they'll order an egg or a tadpole online,
leopard
and then
frogs
what do they do with
dissection.
them? They let them go.
Mhm.
And it's like, again, go back to our disease
Teachers
discussion.
are-
Yeah.
Teachers
But I
are-
mean,
oh,
again,
boy.
they just don't know any better. They're not thinking about
Really?
the impacts, and they're thinking about the individual animal
Yeah.
rather than populations in the bigger picture. That's, I mean, human beings, I think we all tend to think we very narrow scope,
right.
and we don't always just sit back and assess what's happening, you know, and it's like,
And some of that is information outreach and transfer, right? So if you look online and say, "Can I do this?" and you find an abundance of sites, like, yeah, that's fine.
There's
Leopard
a lot.
frogs are common in your area. Sure, just let them go when you're done. So that's an issue too.
I mean, I think that, you know, we all only have so much time and energy and everything else
Right.
in life, but I do think that there's a lot of headway in correcting just some of the common assumptions
Oh,
are
absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
easier fixes in
Mhm.
terms of, because also then you get to at a low cost engage the joy of learning of like, oh, I can't actually get
Right.
warts from, there's other reasons why I shouldn't be holding a frog. I'm actually endangering it. It's not endangering me so much.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the great things that of the good that social media has done is you have this rise in SciComm, scientific communication, and you've got these charismatic people that are scientists and are able to do this outreach, and then it's fun, it's cool, and people like it, and so then you have this broader audience that you're reaching with accurate information, and you're able to communicate with people directly, and they enjoy it, they like it, and you're not just sitting there, you know, waving your finger at them and saying like, don't do that, or like, you're an idiot. You actually have a back and forth with someone that you admire and respect.
And I think maybe maybe on the next episode, on the elephant episode, we'll touch on some of the more animal care, you know, some of the you know, reservations people have, again, of assumptions with I mean I think people assume when they you know, buy a ticket to come and see the zoo, that's going straight to the president of zoos who's sitting in a zoo mansion or whatever, and so I think for people to understand that a huge portion of the proceeds are going into
The majority.
and the majority of the funding for programs like this are coming directly for zoos.
Yes.
Both ways is something really important for people to understand. And so if people want to support your efforts, what should they do? Anything beyond just coming and checking out the Fort Worth Zoo, or is there a
visiting the zoo
donation
is important
page, or-
because again, I mean, we depend upon revenue from our guests that visit. I mean, it does pay our salaries, but it also it feeds the animals. It allows us to provide optimal care for those animals. If we don't have proceeds from the gate, then we look for grant funds and monies, and it's really hard to do because I'm taking care of the animals, I'm taking care of the collection. It's like I don't have a lot of time to go look for extra funds to try to do some of the stuff that we're doing in the wild with these animals. So that's always the hardest thing to do. But they can go to our zoo website, and there's information about our conservation programs there. And I know there's an email address they can ask questions, and then also go onto the Facebook page and ask questions, and people, they'll get answers that way.
And if not just, I mean, not just in terms either of monetary contributions people can do, just education. So just if you hear something and you like, oh, actually, I learned that this is incorrect. Just talking people, sharing things that we do share on our social media pages and things like that from the zoo, and just helping be a part of that information transfer is something that anybody really can do.
So, so if people are watching this and having a revelation, this is the last little thing where they're like, oh my gosh, here I am. I've been hijacked by an attention economy, and I was here. I was obsessing over looking at TMZ to learn about the reproduction of, Robert De Niro's tadpoles are still swimming somehow, and now I realize there's actually I could channel that energy into doing something perhaps a little bit more meaningful, and someone wants to maybe someone's inspired to do a job like yours or encourage their children. What's a good way to kind of get into zoology?
The best way is to volunteer in animal-related facilities.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. But the more volunteerism you do before you get a job is really helpful. And the more diverse you can be. Maybe you don't know what you want to do exactly. I mean, we all changed our mind going through college. What we wanted to do, what we want, and even I hadn't always envisioned myself doing this. It just kind of grew that way. So it's best to get a wide variety of experience as much as possible, and then some kind of college degree that's related to the environmental or biology.
Yeah,
and maybe you just want a free ticket and you want to help out a little bit anyway. You could come and what would you say do you happen to know your youngest and oldest volunteers?
I think it's 18 because of insurance issues. So we do have an internship program, paid internship program. So if they go onto the website under the jobs, it's specifically usually about this time to early summer is when we're going to be posting a lot of those positions. So,
And then on up to, do you know your oldest volunteer at the zoo? Do you happen to anyone? No? Take a whack at it. Ballpark it. No. Late 70s? Yeah. How amazing. I mean, so this is something you could do in your full adult life. Anyone could.
Of course. Yeah. I've had people that work for me used to be MDs because they just got tired of that life. And I was like, I just want to sit at the touch tank and talk to people. So, it's just like,
that's amazing.
Yeah, and sometimes there are programs where they need volunteers to come and just help do some sort of monitoring or things like that. So those are counting eggs. Those are
for us.
Those are fewer and farther between, but there are opportunities like that you can just get involved and actually see what it's like. Because there's some people they're like, I want to do this, but maybe they end up trying it out and they don't like field work or something like that. They want to be more on the captive side. So just like Diane said, getting that experience and volunteering as much as you can, and then finding those paid opportunities too. So
wonderful. Any other closing messages? Otherwise, we're good, I think.
I don't think so.
We solved. Fixed. We did it.
A lot of things. Yeah.
We did it. We got to the end. Nothing else to learn about amphibians.
There's lots to learn. Lots to learn.
No, I know. We could have talked for. We didn't even. Okay, last little thing. Okay. Just give me a little bit about metamorphosis. Give me just a little like what. How does that? Everyone's familiar with butterflies. And, having these different stages of life. Like what's that look? The tadpole to frog or toad stage.
Toadlet or froglet.
Toadlet or frog?
Froglet.
Tadpole. Froglet. Frog. What's the?
Yeah, we usually say froglet or toadlet, and then adult or juvenile adult. Adult.
What's a froglet? Like, what's the
just a little
guy?
Does it have anything going on?
It's like a tail bud.
Sometimes they have a little nubbins there. Little tail nubbin.
So as they develop, they get their with frogs and toads, they get their back legs first, and then they'll get their front legs, and then their tail will start to resorb, and then they crawl out.
Yeah.
Salamanders the opposite.
So
they get their front legs.
Hold on. So tadpole doesn't have arms or legs or anything?
No.
No. And
They actually do
then-
this freakish.
Not during the early stages.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thing
So
where
there's
So
different
toward the end.
stages in the tadpole's development.
Yep.
Yeah, and then towards the
Wow.
end, like the last third of their development, they start to have the buds where their legs are coming out. The rear legs come out first, the front legs, and then when they start to resorb their tail, basically they're really not consuming a lot of food because they're using all the nutrients from their tail that they're absorbing, and then their gills have already been absorbed, like within the first 24 to 48 hours,
Yes.
usually in the very initial stage. The external gills are resorbed, and then they can start to breathe air. So tadpoles are really cool because they basically their organs kind of almost like a caterpillar's, like they kind of, not caterpillar, but a pupa, kind of almost dissolve and change completely before they become a little terrestrial being.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, so now we've learned everything about amphibians and biodiversity generally. Don't argue with me. We're done, solved, fixed. Thank you so much for being on the show. This is a lovely conversation.
Yeah,
Thanks for what you do as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Cheers. All right, everybody. There's more Fort Worth episodes coming up in the future. I already have a couple elephant ones that I recorded. One about elephant herpes, one about elephant training, and really fun stuff coming up. Check out mypurplelady.com to explore your mood and find out more about Blue Lotus and other products there. I am, my plan originally was to have this be a bi-weekly podcast because I want to have more time for researching and learning new skills, like getting better with graphic design and editing to improve social media and stuff. And I have done nothing to advertise this show yet, so I'm going to start focusing on that now that we have enough episodes up, so that when people are finding this for the first time, they have more episodes to listen to. So that's the plan. Just finished editing my special, and so now I have the time. I've literally only sent out one email blast and made a couple social posts about this show thus far, so I want to have a little more time to dedicating to posting highlights and things like that, and building an audience and community so we can grow together. And I'll probably throw in some solo episodes from time to time as well, so it'll happen a little more frequently. But just wanted to let you know that there won't be an episode next week because it will be every other Tuesday from here on out. And see you guys in a couple weeks. Not sure what the topic will be, maybe elephants.